This is an on-air mic test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, welcome to the Kennebunkport Planning Board on October 17th. The first thing I'm noting is attendance-wise, we're all here. So that's good. And the first step is the minutes of the last meeting. I didn't see anything wrong.
No.
Everybody, they look good? Okay. Anyone care to make a motion here?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that
Okay,
motion.
all in favor? Okay. All right, the agenda, just a couple of minor notes. The next meeting after this one is 11/7, and the next one after that will be in December, because we're not going to have a meeting the day before Thanksgiving for some reason. So noted. I guess the first item on the agenda this evening is item 180901, Ledges at Ocean Avenue subdivision. It's a swap of some land in the ledges. So, Mr. Austin.
Thank you. For the record, Ralph Austin, I represent the owners of 2 lots in the Ledges, which is subdivision, residential subdivision off Ocean Avenue. James and Jennifer Viola, who own Lot 11, and James Mandel, who owns Lot 10. And basically, if you look at the plan, which is in tab 14 also, I think I gave out full-size plans.
Yeah.
When the driveway was placed on Lot 11, on the Viola lot, it was misplaced, in a word. It ran right up to the property line. The existing property line is the dashed line that runs right down, and you see the driveway touching that. Which created problems both for future maintenance of the driveway, plowing, also if they want to do any landscaping around it. The neighbor on Lot 10, James Mandel, was agreeable to exchange equal pieces of land so that it would give some room for the Violas at the end of the driveway. And basically, what we're talking about is each lot will be exactly the same size after the exchange as it is before the exchange. There will be no change in the road frontage for either lot. It doesn't create any setback issues, and there's no structures involved in this. They're already, everything's on the ground that's going to be there. And we're proceeding under section 9.4 of the your subdivision regs, which sets forth a procedure for a minor revision of a subdivision, and one of the examples is a lot line change, which this would be. And basically, under 9.4, you skip that whole 2-phase process. You skip the preliminary, and it's just treated as a final. And that's what we're here for tonight, and answer any questions anyone has.
I have a question.
Yes.
And on the plan here, it looked like your paved drive comes in and there's a turnaround there, and the proposed setback goes right through the paved drive. So you don't get a full setback there.
Well, I don't think a drive, and Warner can answer this, I don't believe a driveway has to be set back from the lot line the same as a regular structure. I mean, it's not in the shoreline zone, so it's not a structure.
That's correct. So, you know, the reason why this is a particular issue is that the ordinance does require a 5-foot setback for the
Correct.
driveway once it exceeds 50 feet in length. And so this is what we have. We have a driveway that's over 50 feet in length, and, you know, you have the latter portion of it that doesn't meet that 5-foot setback off of the property line.
And what this proposes is kind of hard to read.
6.2.
6.2
Yep.
foot
Yeah.
setback.
Okay.
So, Ralph, is this going to pose any drainage issues or?
No, I mean, everything's on the ground that is to be there.
Okay.
And all that was taken into consideration, presumably at the time they pulled a building permit, and certainly during the original subdivision approval.
Okay.
And it really doesn't affect all, the original plan and all the subsequent revisions to the subdivision, other than this lot line change. I included all those simply because the subdivision regs say you need to submit all the plans that have been involved in the subdivision, so.
Okay, thank you.
Ralph, has the HOA declaration been amended since 2006 at all? Do you know?
Yes, it was amended at the time that, I think it was KRE Associates owned the Rocky Pasture subdivision, so the only amendment was to allow what's been locally called the pond lot, one of the lots in Rocky Pastures right on the pond, to be a member of the owners association.
Okay. I guess the reason I'm asking is, and I'm not sure that, looking at the declaration that's included in here, Section 15 is the covenants, restrictions, and conditions, and I'm not sure that P applies. It says no lot may be further divided by any means. I'm not necessarily sure these lots are being divided, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts on whether the HOA should be involved in this at all.
I can contact the president of the association and see, certainly every lot owner, which obviously would include then the officers of the association, have been notified, have been notified of the application, and we've heard nothing. But I can, between now and the public hearing, I can check with the president to see if there's any issue or concern.
Okay.
But it's not dividing the lot.
Right,
That's
right.
standard in most subdivision declarations, and it's so you don't have two lots where one existed.
I'm more going down the road of, should the HOA approve of this lot line adjustment? Because I think ultimately, these particular lot owners, they weren't the original applicant on the recorded plans or the amended plans. So are the owners the appropriate people that should be seeking this third minor?
They have to, because they're the only ones with right title and
Yeah.
interest. The original developer does not own any lots in the subdivision.
So is this I guess my question, and I'll plead my ignorance on this, is this the proper way to go about correcting the lot line issue, is amending the entire subdivision plan?
Well, the amendment is of these two lots, but it's technically an amendment to the approved plan. And, yeah, you can't make any changes to lot lines in an approved subdivision without coming to this board.
Okay, I guess that's where it leads me back to the HOA. Should the HOA be involved in approving
I'll
of
check
this
with
as
them.
well? Yeah.
I personally, I don't believe they need to under that provision in the, in the covenants, but I'm more than willing to contact Kim Jarmus, who's the president of the association, and
Okay, and I'd like to get, I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that, but if that's something you want to require or not. I'm just more raising it because it crossed my mind as a potential question.
I think it's
Is
reasonable.
it touching on any common land?
No,
It seems to be just between the two parties.
right,
It doesn't, it's not making the lots undersized, it's not changing their
Right.
size.
But if one of the homeowners,
I think would be helpful to notify him and make sure that the
They're all-
president
they're
is
all
I
available.
mean,
notified.
they
because
have
of
been
the-
notified, it's just,
I'll check with the president. It's,
I don't
again,
see
the
it as a
planning
problem,
board
yeah.
deals with the subdivision regs and the
Right.
zoning ordinance, and this is more, would be in that civil area between the association and the owners, but I have no problem contacting the president and finding out if they even have a position on it.
okay.
So you'll report on that next
Yes,
time?
correct.
Okay. Any other issues at all? So I'll entertain a motion that it's complete.
I'll make a motion to deem the application complete.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all in favor? Well, the only thing we need is George, you haven't done one yet.
Dying.
Yeah, I thought you were. So,
One question I would have of the board, I know the usual procedure is 3 meetings, you know, the initial review, and if you're complete, then the public hearing, and then findings at a meeting after that. We did have to contact the mortgage companies for both lot owners, because it's going to, you know, going to have to amend their mortgages. And one of the mortgage holders, a large national bank, said, well, our approval is good through November 30th. And I figured we were fine because I assumed there'd be a second meeting in November.
so George, the answer is to
So-
prepare a finding of facts based on not having any other problems, because I don't believe any of us have any problems with this.
That we can
And-
have ready for next meeting.
And we have it ready, yeah, because we have 3 weeks till the next
So
meeting.
we would have a
so-
public hearing, and then assuming, where you're assuming
Right,
now,
we'll-
that there will
we
be no
will
public
read the
input,
pub-
that we will have.
We'll vote
So Tom,
Yeah.
just for the record,
Yes.
maybe we should, via show of hands, agree that I certainly wouldn't have a problem with it. And I think, Neil, you might have a problem, you don't have a problem if the HOA weighs in and says
I
this is
don't
fine.
have a problem with it, period. I
Okay.
was just, I had some questions
All right,
about whether
okay.
the
I
HOA
just
needed
didn't want
to
to
be
leave that
involved.
No, I
hanging.
think, yeah.
Good.
So the answer is, at the next meeting, we will approve it and read the finding of facts. And if you would please share them with me before that, so that we're, you know. and
I'm
we'll-
sure we will be in communication,
Yeah, and then we'll distribute them to everybody just up ahead of time to make sure.
yes.
Okay?
Assuming the public hearing goes.
And the
Right.
public hearing, I
Exactly.
presume, is
Yeah.
going to be.
I
no
never
aye.
presume anything.
Sounds good.
The HOA comes in, you know, swinging.
Yeah, if the HOA comes in and says, no way, then.
We
you
have
know.
an issue.
Could be an issue.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Moving right along. Next item is 180902, George H. Walker III, 91 AB Ocean Avenue Cottage LLC, Riverside and Pickering.
Good evening, Zachary Taylor, here with Riverside Pickering Marine, representing the Walkers for their application in front of the planning board to construct, remove an existing docking structure and replace. It's a project that had previously been before the board and approved July 16th, 2014. For various reasons, the project was never constructed at that point in time. So we went through the process of new approval with Maine DEP, Army Corps of Engineers, the River Committee. And just because of changing times, the whole project, we originally started with just submitting the application again, and just through the process ended up at the proposed project that you have before you, which is removing the existing larger structure that's out there that is gonna be in the river on its own here relatively soon, or next good windstorm. So that's no longer functioning at this point in time. We remove that, dispose of it in the upland and a proper facility. And then we're building just kind of a simple 6-foot by 32-foot fixed pier off the existing seawall, 35-foot gangway off the end of the pier down to an 8 by 25-foot float located by pilings. So there's nothing really fancy about the design. The original project had they are keeping the large wharf section at the end, and now it's just a straight, 4 or 6 foot by 32-foot fixed pier. So we originally went in front of the River Committee for the original design. They re-reviewed it last night just to confirm after we made the changes and going through DEP that they are still okay with the project. And I might have gotten a letter this afternoon from Rick Roberts, but we got the okay, and I can make sure I have that for the public meeting. So happy to answer any specific questions that the board has regarding the project.
I'll start. If you want to start.
Please.
I guess the first kind of glaring thing was, why did you propose the pier to be 6 feet versus the required 4 feet in the ordinance?
There's I guess what,
And I think it's proposed to be 6 by, the initial pier part is proposed to be 6 by 32.
yep,
And I think 5.11.9 says that it can be, shall not be wider than 4 feet.
in essence, I think it was a compromise originally from a much larger dock that was originally approved by the planning board. So instead of having that large wharf section at the end, just kind of a smaller, 6 foot wide pier heading out. So that was the original intention. It was a significantly larger project that was previously approved.
But the original project was just replacement of what was existing, right?
No, it was a different project. It was essentially the same, it had the large wharf section, the whole dock was pulled in, so it kept the same shape, just shorter, and then added the gangway off the end, leading to the float. So it was a redesigned project, it was just in the same footprint, as far as the same location. So, I guess we kind of assumed in going through that the previous application that it was approved once before, so as the larger structure that was much wide, it was a 26-foot wide dock at the end. So it seemed like a reasonable compromise to go from that much larger structure to the 6 foot wide pier.
Are you assuming that you were grandfathered in then for the larger structure, and that's why you can go with one that's wider than is allowed today?
Well, the dock, I guess the dock could just be replaced exactly as is, which is just a much larger structure than what we're proposing. So this is significantly reduced the impact and made it just more streamlined dock that isn't having as much impact on the resource.
So the answer is yes?
Yeah, I guess, I think that's the answer. If it comes down that it absolutely can't be built to 6 foot wide, to go from what it was to what it was proved at to what we're at now is a significant reduction from the original project.
Can a dock be, Warner, this is a question for you. Can a dock be grandfathered in?
So, from an ordinance perspective, we would look at this, what you currently have there is a legally non-conforming structure.
Right.
Okay, currently you have a dock structure that in terms of the square footage of it is, larger, than what would be permitted today. And also doesn't currently meet the setback requirements as it was, in place before those setback requirements were put into ordinance. And so I think it's on one level, you have to include some of your reconstruction, relocation to a greatest practical extent. We've generally operated under the assumption that, provided that there are no other issues, that the square footage of any structure that folks have, that they're for replacement of non-conforming structures, that they're entitled to the square footage of what they have, provided that the design is one that is reconstructed in a more in a conforming or more conforming location.
So if you make it more conforming, you can't go back to the original?
Can't go back to the original, yep.
Mm-hmm. But you can basically be outside the limits of the ordinance.
From their perspective, they could come in and ask for the replacement of the size that's there, of that configuration. Planning board I would assume would say, well, meet the setbacks to the greatest practical extent, in terms of the sidelines. I suspect, and again, Zach, you can speak to this because where you've dealt with DEP in the core, DEP may have had an issue with the size of that triangular configuration in terms of a replacement, but would not have had an issue with a 6 foot width versus 4 foot width.
Correct in that. and that was the hangup originally. We just submitted the exact design that was previously approved by the board, and they, it's just, at this point in time, DEP is not gonna allow that, that design. So, we just kind of worked a long process of trying to come up with a compromise. So we centered the dock in between the existing small bands of marsh grass, so it's approximately centered, so it's reducing the impact on the abutters and reduce the overall impact of navigation by pulling it in a little bit, especially during the off season. The gangway and floats seasonal, so it's stored in the upland instead of having that. If you guys are familiar with it, it's out that existing pier is out near the channel's edge. So having that gone for 4 or 5 months out of the year, the gangway and float. I know Mr. Roberts and the River Committee and the Army Corps were appreciative of those changes. So,
Just a question, is there a hardship involved with meeting the 4-foot stipulation? It seems on the surface of it that you're asking to be more non-conforming than it currently is with respect to width. Right now, it meets the ordinance. You want to replace it with a structure that doesn't.
it doesn't meet the ordinance.
The width
It's
is-
26 foot, it's 26 foot wide.
The float is,
No, the
No.
pier.
the pier itself.
there's-
Yeah,
That's
I-
at the end, but what's the width of the current pier heading out to the very end? But the initial width
Picture looked narrow.
as it,
It's approximately 4 foot wide. It's irregular shaped,
okay. So it says it's 4 foot wide by 60 feet long with a 6 foot long by 24 foot wide wharf section.
And to answer your question, yes, this dock is used. They've got multiple family members that have fishing licenses that they use for recreational fishing off of this. They occasionally, they don't use it regularly for commercial access, but they own the Pineapple Catch, which occasionally when the non-anthem's busy, you need to pull in there and move gear, and they work off seasonally, trying to take care of the boat, beginning of season and off season. So in working with DEP, we settled on 6, although 6 foot isn't great, it's better than, and will allow them to still be able to use the dock in the same fashion that they were using it before, or similar fashion. They lose that wharf section, which was that's where they did the work for storing the traps and. But anyways.
So in going through the DEP approval, it looks like the original submission was for the float to be 8 feet by 30 feet, right? That was my initial, I was reading that, and that's what they approved.
Right.
But then in your submission, you went from 8 feet by 25 feet, which then conforms to the current ordinance
Right.
of not being any larger than 200 square feet. So I guess I'm having an issue coming to grips with you're meeting all of the other ordinance requirements. Why can't you meet the 4 foot wide pier requirement as well?
Well, they can work off of, losing, although unfortunate, losing the 5 feet off the float, they can still utilize the float and work off the float. When you've got the 4 foot wide pier, all of a sudden that restricts your access for, carts and moving gear up and down the float or up and down the pier. And, generally they found that in all the trade-offs, they wanted to minimally have that 6 foot wide pier so they can continue to try to use the dock.
So are they using the current pier for that? Are they getting carts and stuff
until
up
now.
and through?
I wouldn't even step on it at this point. The deck boards are all at the point where they could snap if you step on them. So that's what they were using it for until it got to the point where they just can't use it anymore.
But it was 4 feet wide.
But it was 4 feet wide.
No, but they had the large area at the end. So you have the small transition area, but then they have that large triangle that opens up to a 26 foot wide wharf section that's where they were able to kind of work off of.
I think that's what's not coming through in your explanation. I think you're touching on it, but say a little more about what they're going to do on this wharf and why it requires a larger work area. Did you allude to the fact that there's going to be some storage required? There's some traps that are stored, did you say? Or I'm not understanding why the 6 foot is required, or why the triangular area was required for that matter.
Yeah, so I think there's multiple family members that have 5 trap licenses for lobstering. So they were regularly using that dock for their recreational lobstering off of it. So that's not something that, it's a typical, residential 4 foot wide pier is not something that usually accustoms to, easy use of the dock like that. They had the large wharf section at the end. They used to step the mast and, get the pineapple catch, ready for the season and, break it down and prep it for the off season. And that's not the regular tie-up spot for it, but, they like to be able to have the flexibility of being able to, if they've got to load gear or prep for a charter, they've got the ability to use that dock if the Nonantum, for whatever reason, is backed up and they've, it's to increase flexibility for them to accommodate kind of what they had. It's definitely a reduction in what they previously had and its usability. So, 6 foot wide was the maximum that DEP would allow. And it seemed like a reasonable compromise between what was originally approved by the board, which is non-conforming and unorthodox structure, to now what is much closely more aligned with most regulatory agencies' allowable width for a residential dock.
Are you reducing the square footage, Zach, of the,
Yes.
of the fixed portion that's there?
It's like I think it's like a 25% overall reduction in square foot impact.
So what I'm understanding, it's not clear to me, was there anybody who's currently on the board who was here when this was previously reviewed? Tom? No. Okay,
I don't think so.
I'm not sure what weight that carries, that this was previously reviewed and approved. I think what's more important to me is that what was approved before was perhaps a replacement of what was there. Is that
No,
true?
it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was a redesigned dock that had that large wharf section. It was pulled in closer
All right.
to shore. So all they did was take the 4 foot wide section and cut it down by, 30 feet, 20 or 30 feet. And then they added a large gangway at the end to the 8 by 24 float. So it was, it was a redesign altogether.
So let's not, allow me for a second not to talk about what was reviewed and approved in 2014, but rather about what's there and what it was used for until it deteriorated. I understand maybe it's not actively used this season, but that what's there right now has this additional space out on the end of it.
Exactly.
It's used as a work area. You're looking here to present a compromise that reduces the overall square footage, but still retains the ability to use it in a way that maybe wouldn't be available to you if it was a brand-new design and it never pre-existed. You want to preserve that existing use.
Exactly.
So I think that's the way, if we're going to approve this, we need to look at it in terms of the use of it is grandfathered, to use it for the storage and the recreational lobstering and maintenance of the pineapple catch.
It's not just the use of it that's grandfathered, it's the structure that's grandfathered.
Right.
So we're modifying,
fixed-
that's a good point, that you're modifying that structure in a way to take some of the square footage that's out at the end and maybe add it along the gangway to make it 6 foot, rather than 4, which it is today. But still net reducing the overall square footage by 20-some-odd %.
So it's a redesign and reduction of a non-conforming structure to maintain the same use.
Yes.
You're just You just volunteered to be the case manager for this, I think. But yes, that's well crafted.
I hope you wrote that down.
I better.
I'm having a hard time, and I get that the end of the existing pier, it stands there. It's not like something you pull out and, right. The 60-foot pier is 4 feet wide.
Right.
So how, when you go from the new pier
Which is
that
32.
is proposed to be built, you increase it to 6 feet, how is that not more non-conforming? Because, I mean, if relocation of a non-conforming structure, in no case shall a structure be relocated in a manner that causes the structure to be more non-conforming. So what we're saying is that this is less non-conforming?
So how was it no, I think you're on to something. How was it non-conforming before?
It doesn't meet the setback requirements.
What about the surface area of it?
Well, I would say that triangular portion, you know, in terms of a dock.
Is non-conforming?
Is non-conforming.
Yeah.
You know, in the sense that if you're looking at it from a strict sense that you've got a gangway, you know, you've got a fixed pier and a gangway that overall would be 4 feet and a float system. That's what the standard currently allows for.
Right.
And so you have the structure here that has this large, call it wharf at the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the dimensionally non-conforming piece of it.
So you've made that conforming, and another piece of it has,
You're switching it. So
you're trading the non-conformance, you're moving it around.
So looking at the two pictures, the existing dock,
showing a different
including its
paragraph.
4-foot ramp
Which is what's on.
and the triangular piece, is 388 square feet.
Okay.
And the new fixed part is 32 by 6, which is 192 square feet,
Well, that's a good thing.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we've essentially halved the amount of fixed square footage.
Right, and in the process of doing that, have come up against a different paragraph that it doesn't conform to now in the land use ordinance. It conforms to one now, where it didn't before in terms of the shape of the float and the square footage
It's not
of
the
it.
float that's an issue here.
I'm using the wrong word.
Yeah.
And their point of going from 4 feet to 6 feet is to allow a workspace on that section.
That was previously afforded
Just a
by
walk-
that
a walkway to the
oversized
workspace.
area.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was already wider than 6 feet. I mean, the dock I think it was 26 foot wide at the end. So it's not like we're making up a new width here. It was already wider significantly wider. And it's still, you know, it's less conforming altogether. It's 6 foot wide now. It was 26 foot wide before, so overall, this is less
says
non-conforming than it
24.
was.
So they're going to be using the 6-foot pier as workspace?
Yeah.
Or is it just for access back and forth so they can lug gear?
Yeah, so it's to use the dock, so they'll be able to have dock boxes and be able to haul traps up and down and be able to, work off the pier like they were working off it before. So.
There certainly was a portion that was 26 feet wide. It was out at the end of it. Now we're talking about the whole lead up to it being wider than the 4 foot allowed. It really seems like apples and oranges to me.
Why does it say 24 feet in here, not 26?
Maybe it's 24, 26, it's,
The float's 24.
the floats, it was 8 by 24.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this says 24 for the
The old one or the new one?
The old one is.
the old triangle thing is 24 feet wide.
Yes, 24, I apologize.
So now setback-wise, you've moved it out of the setback, the place you had setback issues, right?
Correct,
It's now compliant with setbacks?
correct.
It seems that everything else meets the requirements except for that 6-foot width. And that the thinking, if this was originally approved, was that giving them that extra 2 feet allows you to stack some lobster pots and still walk past them on that area. It moved the workspace from out of the end of that big wharf down onto the now non-conforming 6-foot wide.
I would
Well,
agree.
It's the float at the end, though, 25-foot wide, isn't it, that's non-conforming too?
8 by I think it's just a 200 square foot limit, so it's a,
Yeah, that's 8 by 25.
It's
200.
okay.
That's fine.
It's okay. Just. Just one related question. It says in here that this float is always in the water, even at the lowest tide. Is that true?
I believe so, yes.
Correct.
But during the winter, does it get pulled up?
It's pulled.
By always in the, sorry, it's, by always in the water, it's, as far as DEP and Army Corps is concerned, they wanna know whether a float is within the intertidal range where it might, at a low tide, be resting on the, benthic bottom. So creates a different level of concern where now you're talking about design changes to install float skids or float stops. So by always in the water, it means throughout the tide, normal tide cycles, the float is positioned in the water. It is a seasonal float. It's, the reference is to it being out below mean low water.
Okay.
So that it's not resting on the bottom at low tide. So I could appreciate the confusion on that. It's a clarification as far as where it's positioned in the tidal range.
So it does get pulled in the winter?
Yes, the gangway and float are seasonal.
Is it stored on site?
The goal would be to store it in the upland that's, relatively easy access over the seawall and be able to pull the gangway and store it on the pier and store the float above on the upland.
So it's nice to see that you're proposing a smaller total square footage for the fixed portion of the walkway and, well, the walkway. I guess the sticking point is the reconfiguration from the sort of T configuration to a wider walkway. And could you explain a little bit further why that is advantageous? I know you said they're going to stack some lobster pots, but I mean, the existing configuration is, I don't know, seems to provide more access to the waterway, and it's just kind of curious why you'd want to sacrifice that amount of length along the waterway just to have a slightly wider walkway next to the shore. Still a bit baffling, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very simple answer because we can't build it that way. So the DEP is not gonna let us build a design like that. So that's
I
how
see.
it went down. Like I said, we originally submitted a similar design to what was originally approved back in 2014, and it had the same dock, 4-foot wide heading out. I think it was much shorter, pulled in to make up for the float being in about the same position. So what they cut off, that 4-foot wide section of pier, it was made up for in gangway. So the idea was to keep that wharf section at the end so they could keep using it just the way they were using it. Problem being that we couldn't get it approved by DEP.
Okay, so what you're proposing has been approved by DEP. That's
Yes.
basically it. Okay,
Yeah.
I got you. All right.
DEP, Army Corps of Engineers, River Committee,
Okay.
Maine Historic Preservation Commission.
Does the selectmen need to approve this as well? Because this is a whole new pier, essentially. You're moving it from one area of the property to another. Do you need to get reapproval from the selectmen?
maybe Warner can speak to that.
So they've gone through the selectmen approval once before, and, under the wharf and weir provisions, the selectmen, what they're looking for is to make sure that it doesn't interfere with any navigable, that there are no navigational issues. And so where this is a lateral movement, this isn't going any further out. It's my understanding that this doesn't need to go back through a selectmen reapproval.
The 6-foot wide portion, what kind of board spacing are you going to have on that?
We typically do a 3/4 inch spacing for a 5.5. It's a 6 foot wide board, but it's 5.5 nominal width. So we find the 3/4 inch spacing provides a little bit more ambient light underneath the dock. So I think it's wide. It might be 5 inch
Yeah.
or half an inch for.
I know we had that issue come up on the last one where it says the ordinance says it shall be, I think, half an inch
Yeah.
spaced, but we decided that wasn't restrictive. They can go wider.
It actually would be a non-starter with DEP
Yeah.
and Army Corps. Like, we couldn't even, if you guys held to that, then we could never get a dock approved, because DEP and Army Corps requires that spacing.
Okay.
So it's,
3/4.
yeah, that's based off of, they wanna provide as much spacing as possible while still keeping it safe, so you can increase the light levels underneath the docks. Unless it's ADA, the ADA has a whole different set of requirements.
Great.
So one question that pops up just looking at the items in the ordinance here, Zach, what evidence is available that that shows any type of commercial use of this particular pier?
So we went through this previously. There isn't, they're not using it commercially. They've got their 5-trap kind of residential lobster licenses that they use off the dock. And they, as owners of the Pineapple Catch, it's not a primary use. It's just like kind of emergency need as a, owner of the dock to be able to pull up and be able to, if he's got to move gear, or, do what he needs to do with it. But he's operating off of, out of the Nonantum with that charter. So I think it's like incidental, it's a residential use, kind of incidental use for his, his charter boat that he has.
So he's not trying to increase the use.
No, yeah, he runs out of Nonantum.
Well, the only reason why I bring it up is because in the performance standards, and this is just, in an attempt to maybe, to give the board another piece there, under number 9, it references that a non-commercial ramp, pier, walkway, dock, or wharf shall not be wider than 4 feet, so it leaves you with the question of, well, what do you do with a dock that has commercial use to it? It specifies that non-commercial ones can't be any wider than 4, and so that's my question about what evidence is there that talks about any incidental commercial use that may justify 6 feet.
Well, if he's pulling the Pineapple Catch to the wharf to work on it.
But I think that's up to them to, to show that.
And what was the requirement on commercial dock? Is there comparable?
It's interesting, we actually don't have a standard for a commercial,
Would a
For a
commercial
commercial
dock be allowed there?
so it is a property, it's located in the riverfront zone. I believe this one is the riverfront
Village
zone.
residential.
Or does VR
Yeah.
catch this one?
DR it says.
That's what the application
Okay,
says.
Yep. No, so I apologize. That is, Village Residential does an odd jog where it comes in, it catches a couple of residential properties and then juts back out. So this is one of those. Yep.
So it's not riverfront?
No, this isn't a village, this is Village Residential, according to the tax card.
And as such, we can't have
But
a commercial
would it
dock.
be, so is it shoreland zoning then?
Shoreland
Yes.
50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could never be a commercial use?
Not if it's residential.
Again, that would get into grandfathering condition.
Right.
Yes.
You don't answer 'em, right.
Yeah, it would have to be grandfathered in for commercial use. It'd have to be a non-conforming use.
It's not a conditional allowed use in village residential.
No, I don't
No.
believe so.
No,
Okay.
not for A.
Then
Any
Let's not go
pictures of
down that
pineapple
avenue.
catch tied up there?
Let's not go there.
Well,
That's nice thought.
You'd have to show they sold the lobsters off the pier.
No, I don't think we want to, yeah. I think, again, George said it, he summarized it, I thought nicely. I think we're looking at preserving the current use and moving around some of the square footage to do that, although minimizing it in the process and making it maybe net less non-conforming.
So just one other question. So if you're going from 4 feet to 6 feet, is that going to pose any support issues for the longer boards? Forming a
No,
walkway?
it's 2 foot on center for 2x6. So you're adding a joist.
Okay,
So instead of 3 joists, you'd have 4 joists.
all right. Thank you. Okay, well,
Wow. Of course, huh?
What's next, boss?
Well,
yeah.
I guess I don't have a particularly big problem with them reducing the overall size of it.
We're talking about whether this is complete or not, is that?
Complete is our first step, yes.
Yeah.
And I think, I think that the application is complete.
I would so move.
I like it a lot.
I would move that we deem it complete.
I would second that.
All in favor? Okay, so what that means is that we need to have a public hearing on the 7th of November, which means that if all goes well, it will be, the finding of facts would be read in the first meeting in December, because we're not going to have a meeting the day before Thanksgiving.
Findings of fact, first meeting in December.
So, assuming you don't have any schedule constraints, I guess I'd like to assume that
Great.
schedule.
And,
So we'll have a public hearing next time,
okay.
which is 3 weeks from today.
So would that be the,
7th.
no, on the following meeting? Is that the third, or sorry, the 13th? That sound, is it the second?
Whatever the first.
So it's the first Thursday?
The first Thursday, so
Okay.
first, yeah.
Wednesday.
Wednesday, so.
First
we-
Wednesday.
Is it Wednesday?
It is
Sorry.
Wednesday, yes.
It's been that type of day, okay.
Next meeting is
So it-
11/7.
11/7, yeah. It
Okay.
would be helpful if by that meeting, you could have a map showing the velocity zone and showing the original pier and the proposed pier like it is on this, GIS map, so that we could see for ourselves where the velocity zone is and exactly where this pier is in relation to the Nonantum as well as the other abutter. I think you've got it there, but it's in pieces. It can just be a very simple map with measurements.
Okay.
I believe the V zone in that section of the river only comes just inside the jetties. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it stops.
But we don't have anything that really shows it on here.
Yep, yeah, so just a copy of the existing firm.
I mean, you've got something
Nin-
here,
the
a
1980
photograph, and you got
1983
something
firm.
here, and it doesn't really show that V zone.
Okay, so I guess we're done. We need a volunteer on,
Oh, well, Ed volunteered me, so
I
I'll
heard
take
that,
that one. Okay, I'll take it.
all right.
Well, I'll be away next week, wait a minute.
Next,
trying to think. I got a couple of deadlines coming up right
Okay.
after
Well,
that.
I mean, you can have Ed or Neil do it. Neil's an ace at docs.
I'll take it.
Okay,
That's fine. I might not be a yes on this, but I'll take it.
okay.
Okay.
Good. Maybe that's the best.
Now, next Thursday, the three of the planning, at least three planning board members need to be at the selectmen's meeting at, 6 PM next Thursday. It's a joint planning board and selectmen's meeting on the subject of the next, this modifications to the telecommunications ordinance.
That's
I
Thursday the
cannot be
20th.
there.
And I cannot be
Next
there.
Thursday.
Next Thursday.
Thursday the 25th, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
thank
Okay.
you. So anyhow,
I was planning to be there.
okay,
6 o'clock, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So need a total of three, and someone gets to stand up and say, okay, gets to stand up and say you're
I'll do
here.
it if
Call-
not.
Basically, what
We
happens
don't have
is,
three.
at some point, you call
My
you
wife would
call the
appreciate it.
planning board, you say the planning board is here and we have a quorum, and tell that to the board of
We
selectmen.
wear our official robes?
Of course, yes.
But we'll be sitting out there, not up here.
Yeah, you'll be sitting out there, yes, but,
Don't forget the wigs as well.
It's like the
And
Supreme
try
Court
not
for
to
State
raise your
Union.
hand when they ask for,
Don't raise your hand, okay. All right.
Don't bid on anything.
Don't get anything?
yeah, whatever you do. So, anyway, the final item on tonight's agenda
So do we-
is,
I'm sorry, Tom,
Yeah.
who were the three?
Do we have three?
those two, those
I can
three.
make it.
You can go?
These
All
three
right.
are,
Scott there.
Are signed up.
George, okay.
Thanks, guys.
thank you,
All right.
okay. So our final item is discussion of the road acceptance policy. Paperwork, which I assume is a draft that was handed last meeting.
I did not see it. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
No, I believe the selectmen, this is their policy.
Well,
I haven't seen
their policy
Sure.
has a few problems.
Oh, I would suggest that you share those with,
I
mean,
mean,
I'm
among other
happy-
things, it says
I'm happy to
benefit
take.
the criteria in section 2, and section 2 is where we are, so it's sort of recursive, just you keep looking for the, it's in section 2, so, oh, it's right there, and you just keep going around. I think it's supposed to read section 1.
I'm not gonna take any credit for it.
But anyhow, my first issue or question is,
Sorry, Tom, I'm just looking at this for the first time. Could we take like 2 minutes?
take it,
Thanks.
all you got, yeah, sorry.
Does anyone else need an additional copy?
It's just one page, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just one page. Okay, my first question would be, okay, if this, part one says this, the requirements are pretty much, if it's a dead end, it's not for us, basically, is what I think the first piece says. But,
Well, it could be a dead end that led to a public facility or had some other public benefit.
Public benefit, yeah.
right,
Yeah.
that's
A
somewhat
skating rink.
completely undefined
That's right.
term.
Defined
yes.
view.
Yeah.
As
Okay,
the- as
now
the
is this
selectmen
something that would
determine.
happen during the sketch plan?
No, so my understanding is that it's not the intent, so the selectmen and town manager aren't looking for the board, for the planning board to determine whether or not, this, whether it should be a public or private. What they're asking for is they're asking for the board to consider modifying the subdivision regs so that procedurally, this gets, this is put into the subdivision regs in some portion so that developers are aware that, that there is this road acceptance procedure, that should they decide to propose a road to be public, that they understand that there's some additional criteria that they're going to have to go through as part of the review process. That review process isn't necessarily done by the planning board, but it's done by, it's done through this criteria that's in, or this process that's in section 2 here.
Werner, I'm pretty sure this says that it's done as part of the planning board review process.
Well, it says it shall be determined early in the planning board approval process whether it's, shall be public or private.
But determined
then
by whom? Is the first
Correct.
question.
By the planning board.
By the planning board,
Recommendations.
by the Board of Selectmen,
No,
and
the-
the Board of
the-
Selectmen are gonna come to planning board meetings
No,
for us?
the planning board is going to make a recommendation. Recommendations from town staff, town engineer, and the Board of Selectmen, recommendations from the town
Right.
staff,
Right.
will be submitted to the planning board.
So if the selectmen don't tell us it's a private road, it's up to, or public road, it's up to us to figure it out?
No, I think part of the process is to solicit those, just like we get an input from the fire chief now on certain issues
right.
and the civil engineers, but
So
we need to
We
incorporate,
would have to incorporate getting
This
a letter
delib-
from the Board of Selectmen as part of probably the sketch plan process, since that's really where they
No,
lay out
well,
roads.
well, I think it's probably on us to put it into the regs.
Yeah.
correct. I would
But
procedurally, I would put this in the preliminary.
Yeah.
I would put this in the preliminary, preliminary portion of it. I think it's a good thing to discuss during sketch plan, but you don't have a list of submission requirements for sketch plan.
Oh, true,
Sketch
yeah.
plan is
plan
is the very kind of informal, hey, what do you think?
Right.
And it gives the board, a chance to look at a plan. Now, absolutely, at sketch plan, that should be verbally expressed to a property owner or developer that this is an important piece that they should be aware of. I think it makes perfect sense to bring it up. However, procedurally, I think that this discussion should be in the preliminary portion of the subregs.
I'm having problems reading this. It seems like a catch-22. It says the street may only be brought forward for a town vote by the Board of Selectmen if it provides blah, blah, blah. And then down below, the planning board approval process, whether the street shall become a private or public. And then down below, they're saying recommendations from the town staff, town engineer, and Board of Selectmen will be submitted to the developer and planning board as part of the review process. It seems like you're going round and round.
No,
and
no,
round.
go to the final paragraph. And then
Once a
after
road
those
is approved-
recommendations are made, the planning board decides whether to approve it or not. And then
Then it
the
goes to a
selectmen
town
may
vote
go to
without-
vote.
Without any
So this is
more-
put
Only
that
after
decision
75%
process
of
as
it's
part of our review process.
So
Oh, great.
That's how I read this.
So he gets to bill 75% of it before it goes to the town for acceptance.
Well, let's take, how about Touchstone, for example, off of South Main Street?
Yeah.
So they only recently built, I think, one more house on it that probably made it, let's say it made it all of a sudden 100%. But up until then, a few years ago, it was 75%. Could they petition the town then to become a public road?
Not, well, given that it doesn't even come close to the requirements of a public road, no.
But
But
yes, I think, they could have
Yes, they
petitioned.
they could always submit
certainly.
it, but it wouldn't ever happen.
Right. Are there any how about Binnacle Hill?
Binnacle Hill thinks that there'll be
They constructed
They constructed
pursuant
it
to the
to
public
town
road
standards.
to the public
subdivision standards.
But they may not be at 75% occupancy construction in there for another 20 years.
Yeah,
At those
but
prices,
the
who
Reed
knows?
Lane,
Well,
They're
and
very
it's a valid point, you know, I mean, the last couple of subdivisions that we've done, I mean, there's been a lot of building activity that has followed quickly after the subdivision itself has been approved, but that's not necessarily always how it happens. I mean, we have a number of other subdivisions that are very slow to achieve build-out. And so it's a valid point that 75% could be 5 years, could be 10 years.
For Touchstone, it's probably 20.
Just a
I
moment.
mean,
If
we have some,
You're reading this last one to say, and 75% of the lots have been developed. This is, the lots have to be constructed. I thought that was
Well, I think
at
that,
the completion of the,
But see,
of the
that's a
lot,
key-
not the
I thought it meant
residence.
developed.
that's the key point. I mean, the term constructed is ambiguous. Does that mean the water and sewer is in for the, the infrastructure is installed for 75%? Or does this mean 75% of the lots have a house built on
Well, I
it?
think, as George is
But they need
pointing
to
out, it's
clarify
not
that.
reasonable, it's not reasonable to think it's gonna have a house on it.
Well, that's my point. So
What
if you,
constructed mean?
yeah,
Well-
the term constructed needs to be clarified.
so here's practically how a subdivision winds up working and what we've, as a matter of practice, once we get into the construction phase of a subdivision, it's typical practice to get the base coat of pavement in, and all of the curbing and all of the stormwater and all of that done. And then, what we do as a matter of practice is that we ensure that the developer sets aside the remaining funds for the top coat. Because practically speaking, you don't want to put the top coat in while you're having all the homes constructed. Just because there's going to be damage done to the base coat. And so what we do, so I'll use Ebbs Cove, as a good example. So Ebbs Cove recently, petitioned us to close out the letter of credit. But what we did is they then established a separate escrow account that's in the town's name where we hold 125% of the funds necessary for putting in the top coat. So town holds the funds in this particular case. And it's at the developer, in this case, it's at the developer's discretion whenever they want to put in the top coat. But practically speaking, they want to get at least half the houses in there before they put in that top coat, just to minimize damage to it. So, and that's practically how it works. But
That makes sense.
it's a valid
But
point.
That isn't what this says. but-
I understand.
Yeah, okay.
Right. I'm telling you how it works
Ebbs Cove-
practically on
So we
on
could
our
fi-
end.
This
Ebbs
could be
Cove is
fixed.
gonna stay private, right? Ebbs Cove will probably stay private.
More than likely, yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, under this process, they could at some point, they could petition. I mean, there's nothing that prevents, a homeowners association, from coming to the Board of Selectmen and petitioning, for a road to be taken over.
Yeah, well, I mean,
But,
what is the purpose of this then?
so the entire purpose of this is to get something into the subregs that gives developers a heads up that don't assume that just because you build to the construction standards that are spec'd in the subregs, don't assume that it's an automatic shoe-in for public road acceptance. That is the entire point of trying to have, putting something into the subregs.
Which subdivisions roadways have become public roads?
So Shawmut Woods is public. High Point Farms is public. We have a number of other I would say smaller
So
cul-de-sacs.
High
Bailey-
Point Farms
Bailey
can be used
Court.
as a cut over to the other road.
Well,
Public road.
there's a fire, yeah, I mean, there's a fire access there, but there's no true traveled cut through to Route 9, if that's what you're thinking for
Does
High
that change
Point.
their taxes if they become a public road because they're now paying for public services?
No.
So what's the significance of distinguishing between private way and public? What happens
Town
when,
plows it.
so it's a plowing issue?
And maintains it.
Well, it
maintains
depends.
And
Cleans it.
trash pickup?
All that work you did fixing touchstone
Oh, yeah.
and cracks and all, town would have taken care of that.
Oh, I see.
In the grand scheme, it actually depends, because we have some, I'd say that we have some roads that have been taken over by the town where the town owns it. I mean, they own the fee, in the right of way, and, it's ours, in terms of, stormwater, reconstruction. There are others where it's merely plowing, plowing responsibilities and not maintenance. So it's we have kind of a mixed bag.
Well, it'd be kind of useful to describe what the term public acceptance or public road mean. What happens, what are the implications or what are the liabilities that are incurred by the town when that happens? That would help kind of maybe even guide the developer, because I suppose the developer could be the guy that proposes whether it's public or private, right?
Should, but
Right?
Tom, how would we go about
a little bit more obvious.
incorporating this into the subdivision regs? Is that something that the planning board would
We
do?
would do, it's our document.
But I agree. I
And,
pointed to
and
that
perhaps
piece.
there would be a way during that process to get
It's not a
someone,
gimme.
maybe who wrote this even, involved in that process, or at least to get some input from them.
Is this, did Lori do this, or who wrote this? One of the selectmen, or?
Yeah, I mean, this came, this was a combination that came from town manager and the board of selectmen.
How
What
long
have other
is,
towns
I
done?
think you ought to get legal to weigh in on it because there are parts of here that are not clear. For
How-
example, the following categories shall be used by the board. It doesn't say all of them are used together, or if one is met, then the others, have to be met, or don't have to be met, and so forth and so on. Because there's a lot of ambiguities in here that if the legal looked it over, might be able to be clarified.
But perhaps we
Assume
could do
whatever
that
the
as
sub-
part of,
whatever we do to the subreg would have
updating the
to be
regs, the
reviewed.
subregs.
By Amy, right?
can
Maybe
I
we could
just,
take that.
can I point something out? Just looking at the subdivision regulations, if you look at the street design and construction standards, the general requirements, it says the board shall not approve any subdivision plan unless proposed streets are designed in accordance with any local ordinance or the specifications contained in these regulations. Approval of the final plan by the board shall not be deemed to constitute or be evidence of acceptance by the municipality of any street.
Yeah, that's already in there.
So it's in there. So what, I guess, why are, I think that's clear.
This is asking us to make a recommendation,
Well, this is a
to
request for,
approve or not.
But why, I guess my question is, it's not up to us, it's up to the developer. What does the developer want to do? Do they want to build it to the public right-of-way width, or do they want to do the private? That's their prerogative, it's within the
Right.
subdivision regs, these are, all right, if you want to do it, here are the guidelines.
Yeah.
So that's the minimum criteria, but on top of that, then there's recommendations from the town and the Board of Selectmen that are required in order to,
So why couldn't, when we went through the Binnacle Hill
right,
process, and we got the engineer's comments and about the traffic study, the slope,
Right.
everything with it. Why couldn't that be part of that process?
Oh, it
And
could-
then that's presented to us, so when we
Absolutely.
give the final
Right.
approval.
it absolutely could be. You
And-
could say, okay, instead of just getting the engineer's input, we needed an input from the Board of Selectmen, for example, at that point.
Yeah.
I think the process would accommodate it, but right now, we don't own that responsibility. Although if this passes, I think the intent is that we do. The fact that we're guessing at that is a little troubling.
I'm saying this half
Yeah.
comically, but seriously, if Timber Lane becomes a public road, could they open up the gate and plow right down Henchy? Just take the snow right down there because they're both public ways now.
Henchy's
No,
not a
Actually, it's
public
not
way.
public.
Oh, it's not.
no.
Right. And she is private, and it's owned by
12 feet
Timberway,
wide.
but it's private road.
Okay.
And when you say recommendations from town staff, do they mean you?
So,
I mean, we're not gonna get the town clerk to.
no,
weigh in and-
no, I mean, that's a general, that's a general catch-all, what they're looking for there is they're looking for public works. Primarily, they're looking for public works input,
Well, I think it ought to be specified.
They're looking for, they're gonna look for police weigh-in, they're gonna look for, we already ask for, for that. We primarily ask for the fire department to weigh in, as a matter of emergency services. But Public Works weigh-in is important for the Board of Selectmen to hear because of limitations with equipment. They're the ones that, practically speaking, wind up with
And that's-
maintenance
and we also-
responsibilities.
Especially if
That's
it
part of our
were being
process.
put forward for.
If it's
That's
10
right.
years later, who would petition the town? The developer is long gone. Would it be the homeowners association?
Yes.
Okay.
So the term public benefit, that's kind of vague, isn't it? I mean,
I think intentionally so.
intentionally vague.
That's right.
Oh,
That's how I read this.
Well, so.
I
okay.
wouldn't.
No one has done this, sharpening the pencil
yeah, okay.
step that I think would need to come about
And
as part of putting this
there's
into the
no
regs.
definition in our ordinance about, as to what a public benefit is.
That's right.
So it doesn't really give us.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the
That's pretty
recommendation
vague.
comes from the
So
selectmen.
ultimately.
Yes,
I
I
think-
would
for
agree,
example.
I would agree with that, I think that, I think as you recognize, sometimes you have things that are purposefully vague because you can't anticipate and necessarily spell out every, potential conceived public benefit that we may want to consider. So I think, to your point, I think it is left intentionally vague.
And a public meeting would be, we already hold those, it would be an opportunity to add this additional.
So I
Subtopic.
think ultimately we, for now,
So I'll give an example just of other public benefit that, so look at, if a developer knew that based on input from Board of Selectmen, maybe also input from the planning board, that you had a particular parcel that could provide for some substantial access to open space, to public open space, and you wanted that to happen, then I think that is one of those items that could fall into that other public benefit, that you may want to have public access to that road because you want public access to that particular piece of open space. So I see that as one of those, items that could go into that other public benefit piece. And it may trigger, if that's the carrot for public acceptance, it may, that may trigger some considerations in the overall design of a subdivision as well. If it's, if that is, if there's some discussion along those lines. And again, it's still no guarantee because we have town meeting, and so it still has to go to the public for a vote. But I think it has the possibility to influence design considerations for subdivisions.
Yeah.
But
so
certainly prompts a developer to tell his consultant to think about that. If there's really a desire to have it as a public road, then all right, so what can we do in this design that creates some element of public benefit? And again, I don't have any examples, but that's just what comes to mind when I think of what is an other public benefit.
So could I ask my fellow board members to just write down what you see as questions that you might want to ultimately put to Lori? And maybe we should I could arrange a meeting with her some point to go over the whole thing.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
but
that's, I think that's an, an
Or her
appropriate way to
designate.
proceed.
Or her designate,
Sure.
right, as long as it's not Warner. but-
Exactly right.
Do we
Yeah.
hold a public hearing on this, or do we just modify things?
So you would follow, so I would say once you have conversation, and I think putting forward some suggestions and questions on this, I think is good. You know, I think it brings up a lot of questions that, you know, might lead to some tweaks or modifications to this policy. At that point, I would expect that we would look at the subregs, make a determination if we want to make a modification to the subregs to incorporate this somehow procedurally. There is a public hearing that you would have to hold for modifications to your subregs. But since this is your document, this is your operating document, I mean, we publicize it as a public hearing generally, but that's it. You know, so.
We should probably designate two people, so it's not a quorum to propose those changes up for starters, and then have a meeting to discuss it after. But the first step is I would like to send questions from us to Lori to get clarification. So if you guys could all send them to me.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Send them to Tom. Tom's going to send them to Lori, okay.
Well,
With a request for a meeting, I assume that would have to be
Yeah.
a public meeting.
All right.
Well, I mean, so I think you all as a board could submit your questions and concerns to Tom.
Yeah.
And then, you know,
Tom and
you
Lori.
could you could direct Tom to have a meeting with Lori and myself and to go over those, you know, to go over those points.
Yeah.
that's true. We can do it that way. Okay, so get me those, and I will happily entertain any other motions someone might have at this moment.
How about a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Okay, thank you.
We're off.